Again and again she tells me how sick she is. Everything is so hard for her. Why don't you just tell me? Everything could be so simple, but you want to make it difficult for yourself, for yourself.
Her heart thumped in her chest as she heard his laughter echo through the hallways. "My sweet love, where are you hiding?" The sound of his voice sent a shiver down her spine. It was playful, almost too gentle for what she knew was lurking beneath. She crouched lower, herself further into the cold stone wall, hoping the shadows would conceal her. Her breath was shallow, barely audible, but she could still hear the distant echo of his footsteps closing in. "I can smell you. Your smell drives me crazy. I know you're here." His voice dropped to a whisper. The dim light cast long shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with tension, the kind that, all at once, she knew she couldn't run anymore. It was only a matter of time before he would find her, as he always did. It all started on an ordinary night, though she couldn't remember what exactly had triggered his fixation. Perhaps it was the way she moved in the crowded room, unaware of his predatory gaze, or maybe it was her laughter, carefree and untamed by the darkness that ruled his world. Whatever it was, from that moment, he was obsessed. He was there, standing in the shadows, when she walked into the elegant ballroom with a few friends. The air buzzed with drinks, laughter, and music, but all of that faded into the background the moment he laid eyes on her. She didn't notice him at first, the man with a gaze too intense for the casual atmosphere. He was, in these circles, a mafia king feared by many, yet respected for his efficiency. But to her, he was just another figure in a sea of faces. That night, everything changed. He watched her, studied her. She was so oblivious to by the shadows that cloaked his world. Something stirred inside him, a fierce need to possess what was pure. She was an enigma, and he couldn't tear his eyes away from her graceful movements. The obsession took root that night, and soon it consumed him. The first time he took her, it wasn't planned. It was impulsive, driven by an overwhelming desire he couldn't control. She had been walking home late after a night out, her footsteps light, unaware of the looming figure watching her from the shadows. Before she knew it, the world shifted. A black van screeched to a halt beside her, and strong arms pulled her in. Her screams were muffled by into her eyes wide with, as she fought against him. But it was futile. He was too strong, too determined. When she woke, she was in a luxurious bedroom. Silk sheets, expensive decor, but no windows. The door was locked from the outside, and there was no way out. That's when she saw him leaning against the doorway, a dark smile playing on his. I couldn't let you go. His voice was low, but with something more, something possessive. You belong to me now. Her heart pounded in her chest, confused and swirling in her mind. She had no idea who he was or why he had taken her. But that night marked the beginning of her nightmare. It didn't take long for her to realize that he wasn't just a man with obsession. He was powerful. His empire spanned far beyond the walls of her gilded prison. And his men watched her every move, but she refused to give up. Weeks later, she managed to slip past the guards one evening when he was away. Her heart raced as she bolted through the mansion, her feet against the cold marble floors. Freedom was so close, she could almost taste it. But then, he found her. The sound of his voice stopped her in her tracks. Running away from me, my sweet love. His tone was deceptively calm, but there was an edge beneath it. She turned to see him standing at the end of the hallway, his face a mask of controlled fury. He approached slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. Before she could scream, his hand wrapped around her arm, dragging her back to her prison. I warned you, he hissed, his grip tightening. You can't escape me, ever. Over the years, she tried countless times to flee. Every time he found her, in small villages far from the city, in the bustling streets of different countries. He always knew where she was, no matter how far she ran, no matter how well she hid. He hunted. Each time, his obsession grew darker. You keep making me love you more with every chase, he would whisper in her ear when he caught her, in a twisted mockery of affection. She fought back harder with each escape, her desperation growing with the intensity of his possessive love. But he was relentless. His resources were endless, and his obsession was absolute. There were moments when she believed she was free, living quietly in places where no one knew her name. But then, he would show up, always when she least expected it. The last time he found her, she was in a small coastal town, far from the life she once knew. She had been there for months, thinking she had finally outrun him. Did you really think you could hide from me forever? Her heart sank, the icy fear returning to her veins. I told you, didn't I? His voice was soft but filled with, I will always find you. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if willing herself to disappear. Her trembled, fear seizing her every muscle. The faint rustle of fabric was the only warning she got before she felt his breath brushing against her. Open your eyes. The command was soft, but with a dark authority that made her flinch. Her froze, unable to disobey. Slowly her eyes fluttered open, and there he was, as always. He was as beautiful as ever, but even more. In the flickering light, his features were sharp, chiseled to perfection, but his eyes, they glinted with something dark, something possessive, that chilled her to the core. His fingers coasted over her, the back of his hand brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contrasted the raw in his gaze. Then his thumb found her lower, it in a slow, almost reverent motion. You can run from me, he murmured, his voice a low growl. But I will find you again and again. His curled into a smile that made her heart race, the kind of smile that promised both and pain. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers as he whispered, with every pursuit, my feelings for you grow even stronger. She didn't dare speak, her thought dry and tied with fear. The words lodged there, refusing to come out, so instead she stared at him, her eyes wide but devoid of emotion. She had long ago learned that showing weakness would only make it worse. Mine, forever. His voice was a chilling whisper against her as his found the of her neck, placing a slow there. She felt the warm and insistent, while her heart pounded painfully in her chest. Her pulse raced, but not with excitement, only dread. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to push him away, to fight back, but she was frozen, trapped in the web of his dark affection. Why? The word slipped from her before she could stop it, a trembling question that barely made a sound. He chuckled, the sound rich and, why what, my love? His fingers tangled in her hair, pulling gently but possessively. Why won't you let me go? Her voice was a whisper, fragile and small. He pulled back, just enough to look into her eyes, his own gaze filled with something fierce, something primal. Because you belong to me. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. I never asked for this, she whispered, a tear escaping down her cheek. His thumb wiped it away instantly, but his smile never faltered. It doesn't matter. You've always been mine from the moment I saw you. His voice dropped lower, more. You can deny it all you want, but your soul knows. Her breath hitched as he leaned closer, near hers. Every part of you calls to me, he breathed against her, his words a promise with darkness. She shook her head slightly, desperate to pull away, but his grip on her tightened. His fingers slid from her hair to her jaw, holding her still as he stared into her eyes, searching for something, perhaps her surrender. I'll never be yours, she whispered, even though her voice trembled with uncertainty. A glint appeared in his eyes, and his smile widened. Oh, but you already are. He leaned in, capturing her in a deep possessive that left no room for doubt. She wanted to scream, to shove him away, but the in his consumed her, leaving her weak. When he pulled back, he was breathless, his eyes with something. You'll see, he whispered against her. Soon enough, you'll understand. Her heart thudded in her chest, a mixture of fear and a strange, unwelcome pull toward him. She hated him. She wanted to escape, to run far away and never look back. But deep down, buried beneath the fear, was a part of her that wondered if he was right. She had been running from him for so long, and yet here she was again, caught in his web. I will always find you, he murmured, his brushing against her ear, his voice a haunting promise, because you are mine forever.
Gotta check my skill, damn little nigga time for super fundamental push on it. There's a turn your story, my look. You better be a candy double shit. You better be a damn number getter. So you check my time on that look.